Prince William has just done something his father never had the courage to do. He has gone after Queen Camilla's family directly, cutting off their funds and pushing them out of the royal circle one by one. This sudden financial strike follows the surfacing of dark, personal secrets involving Camilla and her ex-husband that have left the future king absolutely furious. What began as a quiet administrative change has now exploded into a full-scale reckoning for those who once protected the affair that destroyed Princess Diana. Palace insiders say William is not just angry, he is finished. But what was the final revelation that convinced him there was no turning back? Before we uncover the hidden evidence that changed everything, please subscribe so you never miss our next royal investigation. Stories of this magnitude rarely end where they first begin. The decision to end 20 years of royal protection only makes sense once we return to the moment in September 2022 when William realized he finally held the power to settle a debt decades in the making. The moment Charles became king, the entire weight of the monarchy's most powerful private estate landed squarely in the hands of Prince William. The Duchy of Cornwall is not merely a collection of lands. It is a financial empire worth over $1 billion, generating millions of pounds every single year to fund the heir to the British throne. It controls a vast and ancient network of properties stretching across Cornwall, Wales, and the Isles of Scilly. For decades, it had been the private domain of King Charles, but in September 2022, the keys, the contracts, and the payroll were handed to a man who had been waiting a lifetime for this specific moment of oversight. As William began his review of the institution's finances, one name reportedly stopped him cold: Annabel Elliott. To the public, Annabel was a highly respected interior designer, once ranked as the 5th most influential woman in her field within the entire country. She was a constant, polished presence at royal events, often seen sitting in the royal box at Wimbledon or appearing in official documentaries with a warm, supportive smile. But to William, she represented something far more personal. Annabel is Queen Camilla's younger sister, and for nearly 20 years, she had been a permanent fixture on the duchy's payroll. She had been handed the lucrative role of managing the interior design of the estate's properties almost immediately after Charles married Camilla in 2005. For 2 decades, the payments were steady. The last recorded figures before the transition showed annual fees of nearly £20,000 and furniture purchases exceeding £12,000. However, those were only the visible numbers. The true total spent over 20 years had never been fully disclosed to the public. Someone had made sure of that. Insiders say that when William saw her name on the document, his reaction was quiet but final. He did not ask for a meeting or a graceful transition. He simply looked up from the ledger and informed his staff that he would deal with her. By the time the 2024 Duchy of Cornwall annual report was released, the world saw the result of that decision. In the column where Annabel's payment status had once stood, there was now only a single word: nil. The message sent through that one word was deafening. There was no press release, no public thank you for 20 years of service, and no attempt to cushion the blow. Palace sources tried to tell the media that the change was no reflection on her work, but those close to the prince knew the truth. This was a cold, direct message to every person in Camilla's inner circle. The protection and the financial rewards they had enjoyed under Charles were finished. But why would William target a sister for the actions of a queen? The answer lies not in the present, but in a series of secret meetings held 3 decades ago behind closed doors. Annabel Elliott was far more than an interior designer to the Queen. She was the silent architect of a shadow life that Prince William has never forgiven. To understand why he acted so decisively, one must look past the official balance sheets and into the private history of a country house in Dorset. During the late 80s and early 90s, while Princess Diana was struggling with deep depression and isolation inside the palace, Annabel's home served as a primary sanctuary for Charles and Camilla. She was not merely a bystander to the affair, she was its gatekeeper. While William and Harry were small children, watching their mother's world cave in around her, Annabel was reportedly providing the keys and the cover for their father's secret meetings. There is one particular evening that has become etched into the darker lore of the palace. Charles had arrived at Annabel's home in a state of absolute fury, triggered by something Diana had said or done. He was snapping at everyone, and even Camilla struggled to calm him. It was then that Annabel reportedly took her sister by the shoulders, told her that Diana did not even come close to her, and pushed her toward the bedroom door to attend to the future king. For William, this was the ultimate betrayal. This was a woman who looked at a young mother in the middle of an emotional collapse and decided that the affair was worth the cost. William was only 11 years old in 1993 when the full transcripts of the secretly recorded phone calls between his father and Camilla were published. He did not hear the truth from his father, he read it in the newspapers along with millions of strangers. He learned exactly which friends had lied for his father and which homes had been used to hide the truth. Annabel's name was on that list. The wound never truly healed, but the final trigger came decades later. In 2023, during a televised documentary for the coronation, Annabel sat before the nation and spoke of Camilla's complete loyalty to the king. To William, watching the woman who helped facilitate his mother's suffering lecture the public on loyalty all while still being paid by his estate was the final insult. He had spent his entire life watching his father choose Camilla over everything else. But as the new Duke of Cornwall, William realized that he no longer had to fund the people who had made his mother's life a misery. But as William moved to erase the gatekeepers of the past, a new figure from the old guard reappeared, threatening to bring every dark detail of the affair back into the public eye. Just as William was systematically removing the sister who had guarded the door, another ghost from the past walked back into the royal spotlight. In February 2026, the public was startled to see Andrew Parker Bowles, Camilla's first husband, appearing at a military memorial on behalf of Princess Anne. At 86 years old, he was once again functioning as a semi-official representative of the crown. For many, his presence was a harmless nod to tradition, but for William, it was a visceral reminder of the network of silence that had once suffocated his mother. Andrew Parker Bowles represents a chapter of royal history that William has long wished to close. He met Camilla in the late 1960s, and they married in 1973 in a society wedding attended by 800 guests. Yet, within 6 months of that wedding, Charles was already writing to Camilla, and by the late 70s, he was a constant presence in their home. Andrew was eventually known in certain aristocratic circles by a devastating description: the man who laid down his wife for the prince. He had allowed the future king to treat his marriage and his home as a private playground, rarely offering a word of protest. The history is brutal and deeply personal for William. In 1980, Charles invited Camilla as his official escort to international celebrations, while Andrew remained in the background. There were reports of a polo club ball where Charles, in full view of a crowded room, reached his hand into the front of Camilla's dress. Andrew was present that evening. He stood there, a man who had commanded cavalry squadrons and served his country, and he did nothing. He accepted the public humiliation because, in that world, one did not challenge the heir to the throne. For decades, Andrew's continued public loyalty, his attendance at the 2005 wedding, and the 2023 coronation was used as a powerful tool for Camilla's rehabilitation. It sent a message to the world that if the wronged husband could forgive her, then the public should as well. But William sees this loyalty as a calculated performance designed to protect a social standing that should have been forfeited long ago. Seeing Andrew back in an official capacity in 2026, photographed warmly alongside Camilla's children, Tom and Laura, signaled to William that the old guard still felt untouchable. This reappearance served as a catalyst. William realized that as long as these figures remained in the periphery, the truth of what happened to Diana would always be treated as a settled inconvenience. By cutting off Annabel, William was not just saving money, he was beginning to dismantle the very foundation of the world Andrew Parker Bowles helped build. But as the prince began this final push to erase the enablers, he discovered that the queen had already identified her next target and she was moving closer to his own home than he ever imagined. Prince William is a man of immense control, a leader trained from birth to carry his burdens in silence. But there is one line that, once crossed, turns his quiet patience into something fierce and unyielding. That line is his wife, Catherine. While William had spent years tolerating the presence of those who facilitated his father's affair, his tolerance vanished the moment he realized the same machinery was being turned against the woman he loved. By late 2025, the friction between the Queen and the Princess of Wales had reached a breaking point within the palace walls. Sources close to the household described a queen who had become increasingly territorial and irritable, frustrated by the public's overwhelming devotion to Catherine. To Camilla, every headline praising Catherine's grace was a reminder of her own long and painful struggle for acceptance. She reportedly began to view the younger generation not as the future of the monarchy, but as a threat to her own hard-won status. This tension was not merely about personality, it was about survival. Camilla understood a reality that few dared to speak aloud. Her power is entirely dependent on King Charles. The moment William becomes king, Catherine becomes queen, and Camilla's central role, her funding, and her influence disappear. To protect her position, she reportedly allowed her team to engage in the same subtle, calculated media tactics that had defined the 1990s. When stories began to leak that painted Catherine in a negative light, most notably the narrative regarding the wedding preparations that had caused so much internal strife, William's reaction was immediate. He did not go to a press secretary, he went directly to his father. According to accounts of that confrontation, William was blunt. He reminded Charles that they had seen this pattern before, where the palace PR machine sacrificed the reputation of one royal to bolster another. He reportedly told his father that if he gave Camilla an inch, she would take a mile, and he demanded to know why a stranger was being allowed to do this to his family. Charles, however, responded with the same loyalty that had defined his life, defending Camilla over his own son. It was a repeat of the pattern William had lived through as a child, his father choosing Camilla every single time. This was the moment the relationship between the heir and the queen moved from cold tolerance to open war. William realized that he could no longer rely on his father to protect the future of the monarchy. He would have to do it himself. But as the internal battle intensified, it was a single public gesture during a high-profile state visit that finally forced William to take the ultimate step. In September 2025, during the high-stakes atmosphere of a state visit at Windsor Castle, a single moment occurred that transformed a private family rift into a public declaration of war. The British royal family had gathered to welcome the President and the First Lady of the United States. It was an event designed for perfection, where every movement is choreographed and every gesture carries the weight of international diplomacy. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was standing in the line of welcome, engaged in a warm and natural conversation with the First Lady. Then, Queen Camilla arrived. As the cameras rolled and journalists from across the globe looked on, the Queen did something that left witnesses stunned. In a sharp, dismissive motion, she swept her hand toward Catherine, signaling for her to move aside and step back. It was a gesture of such blatant disrespect that it seemed to belong to a different century. Catherine, ever the professional, obliged and moved out of the way, but the damage was done. The future Queen of England had been waved away like a minor official standing in the wrong spot at a bus stop. Prince William watched this interaction happen in real time. For him, it was a moment of absolute clarity. He had spent his childhood watching his mother be marginalized and manipulated by the same forces, and now he was seeing history repeat itself before his very eyes. A palace source later confirmed that William found the Queen's behavior entirely out of line. To him, this was no longer about a clash of personalities, it was an institutional insult to the woman who would one day sit on the throne beside him. The retaliation came only moments later, and it was delivered through the silent language of royal protocol. When William finally greeted Camilla, he broke a rule that is rarely, if ever, violated by a senior royal in public. Traditionally, William would bow his head to the Queen as a formal acknowledgement of her rank. On this day, he did not. He leaned in for 2 brief, casual kisses on the cheek, the kind of greeting one might offer a distant acquaintance at a garden party, and then he simply moved on. In a world where every motion is recorded and analyzed, this was a thunderous statement. By refusing to bow, William was signaling to the palace, the press, and the Queen herself that he no longer recognized her seniority over his family. It was a visual rejection of her authority. The palace was shaken, and Camilla, who has spent 3 decades reading the subtle signals of the British aristocracy, understood the message perfectly. William was no longer a grieving teenager with no power to act. He was the heir to the throne, and he was beginning to strip away the deference she had fought so hard to obtain. But as William prepared to move the machinery of the state against her interests, the Queen realized her primary defense was failing, and she began to look for a way to protect what remained of her legacy. The confrontation at Windsor served as the final catalyst for a structural transformation that palace insiders have dubbed the institutional guillotine. William realized that as long as Camilla's inner circle remained embedded within the royal machinery, the ghosts of the past would continue to haunt the present. He did not seek a loud, emotional confrontation. Instead, he used the one tool he controlled entirely: the budget. William's vision for the monarchy is fundamentally different from that of his father. While King Charles has spent decades rewarding personal loyalty with positions of influence and financial security, William is building a lean monarchy. He believes that proximity to the throne is a privilege that must be earned through active service, not a guarantee of a lifelong paycheck funded by the state or private estates. By removing Annabel Elliott from the payroll in 2024, he sent a cold and direct message to the entire institution. The days of the royal hangers-on were over. This was a clinical, administrative execution. The 2024 Duchy of Cornwall annual report served as the formal death warrant for the old way of doing business. When the word nil appeared next to the name of the Queen's sister, it signaled that the financial protection Camilla's family had enjoyed for nearly 20 years was finished. William was systematically stripping away the social and financial scaffolding that had supported Camilla's rise to power since 2005. This move served three distinct purposes. First, it was a practical application of his modernization strategy, proving that no one is immune to his fiscal reforms. Second, it was a public declaration that the future king would not be bullied or manipulated by the Queen's team. And third, it was a personal reckoning. William was no longer willing to spend a single pound of the duchy's income on the individuals who had facilitated the affair that destroyed his mother's life. He was erasing the enablers, one contract at a time. Camilla watched this unfolding with a growing sense of panic. For 30 years, she had outmaneuvered her rivals by playing the long game, but she had never faced an opponent as focused as William. He was not acting out of raw, teenage anger. He was acting with the quiet authority of a man who knows he will eventually hold all the power. Camilla understood that if William could do this to her sister while he was still the Prince of Wales, he would be capable of far more once he became king. She realized that her influence over the sovereign grant and the royal estates was evaporating with every passing month. If she wanted to protect her own future and the inheritance of her children, she had to act before the transition of power became permanent. In the early weeks of 2026, she made a quiet, defensive move that stunned the palace legal team, a move designed to place her most valuable and personal assets beyond William's reach forever. In late February 2026, a report emerged that made royal watchers stop and read it twice. Queen Camilla had quietly signed a power of attorney document, transferring the ownership of Ray Mill House, her private estate in Wiltshire, to her children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. On the surface, this could be explained as sensible estate planning. Camilla is 78 years old, and King Charles is 77. Currently fighting a well-publicized battle with cancer. In any other family, transferring property to one's children under these circumstances would be entirely normal. But in the context of the current war inside the palace, it was a move of profound desperation. Ray Mill House is the one place in the world that has always been entirely hers. She bought it in 1996 using her divorce settlement from Andrew Parker Bowles, paying £850,000 for the sanctuary. It is where she gardens, where she retreats when the pressures of royal life become unbearable, and where she truly feels at home. By moving it out of her own name and into the names of her children, she was performing a legal maneuver designed to place her most personal asset beyond the reach of the future king. Camilla knows exactly what William is capable of doing. She had watched him erase her sister's 20-year income with a single stroke of a pen. She also knows that palace officials have already confirmed she will not receive royal lodge if Prince Andrew ever vacates it. Ray Mill House is her only guaranteed refuge. When William becomes king, he will control the sovereign grant, the very lifeblood of her royal existence. If he decides to limit her funding or restrict her access to crown properties, she needs a fortress that he cannot legally touch. By placing the house in the names of Tom and Laura, she has created a defensive fortification. She is effectively ensuring that even if William strips her of her royal status and funding, she will still have her sanctuary. It is a striking admission of her own vulnerability. The woman who fought for 40 years to wear the crown is now spending her final years as queen trying to protect her private life from the man who will succeed her husband. But as Camilla worked to secure her physical walls, she failed to realize that the emotional distance between her and her own children was growing a fracture that would become painfully visible during the most important time of the year. While the legal transfer of property offered a sense of security, the Queen was facing a far more painful reality within the walls of her own family. The public began to witness a visible fracture between Camilla and her children, Tom and Laura, as they appeared to distance themselves from the royal machinery they had occupied for 2 decades. This was the public explosion that no palace press office could contain. In December 2025, a single decision by her son, Tom Parker Bowles, sent shockwaves through the palace and the press. Camilla had personally reached out to Tom, inviting him to join the royal family at Sandringham for the traditional Christmas celebrations. She had expressed a deep desire to be with him, reportedly telling him directly that she had not had a proper Christmas with him in a long time. It was a rare, vulnerable plea from a woman who usually maintained a mask of absolute poise. But Tom's response was public and final. He informed the media that he would not be attending the royal gathering. He chose instead to spend the holiday on the sofa at the home of his ex-wife. For the Queen of England to be publicly rejected by her own child in favor of such a modest, private arrangement was a devastating blow to her image. It signaled to the world that even those closest to her were beginning to prepare for a future where she was no longer the center of the royal world. The reason for this sudden distance is not difficult to find. Tom and Laura Parker Bowles have spent years navigating the complex social advantages that come with being the stepchildren of the king. But under William's new vision for a lean monarchy, those advantages are no longer guaranteed. William has made it clear that royal proximity will no longer serve as a shield for privilege or a bypass for merit. Her children, carrying the name of Andrew Parker Bowles, can sense that the protection they enjoyed under Charles is a fading commodity. They are repositioning themselves before the crown passes to a man who values institutional duty over family favoritism. This isolation has left Camilla in a precarious position. She has secured her house, but she is losing her allies. Her children are stepping back, her sister has been removed, and her former husband's presence only serves to remind the public of a history William is determined to bury. The image of the invincible queen was crumbling. As the public watched this internal family drama unfold, William was already preparing for a final symbolic appearance that would confirm his dominance to the entire nation. The transformation of Prince William from a grieving teenager into the most powerful figure in the British monarchy was completed not through a formal speech, but through the silent authority of his presence. Today, when William stands on the palace balcony or at a state banquet, the world no longer sees the vulnerable 15-year-old boy who walked in silence behind his mother's coffin in 1997. Instead, they see a man who has mastered the art of royal symbolism to communicate a message of absolute dominance. Royal experts have noted a distinct and chilling shift in the dynamic between the Prince of Wales and the Queen. While King Charles remains the reigning monarch, the psychological center of the family has moved. In every public appearance, the word used by those close to the palace to describe William's attitude toward his stepmother is no longer respect or affection, it is tolerance. William tolerates Camilla because it is his duty to the institution, but he does not value her presence in the same way his father does. His body language during official events is a masterclass in emotional distance. He performs the necessary rituals with a clinical precision that leaves no room for genuine warmth. Camilla, according to several royal biographers, has always been slightly afraid of William. She spent decades outmaneuvering politicians, courtiers, and the press to secure her place beside the king, but in William, she has met an opponent who cannot be charmed. He is the one person whose memory of the 1980s and 1990s remains untainted by the palace's attempts to rewrite history. She knows that every day Charles remains on the throne is merely a stay of execution for the influence of her own inner circle. She is no longer the woman in control. She is a figure who must now react to the decisions of a man who remembers everything. This symbolic dominance was on full display during recent ceremonies where William's position was emphasized above all others. He stands as the bridge between the traditional past and a lean, modernized future. By refusing to bow during the 2025 state visit and by systematically dismantling the financial support for her family, William has shown that he is already ruling in spirit. The Queen is now effectively a guest at her own former court, watching as the heir prepares to finalize a reckoning 30 years in the making. The power has shifted, and the final reflection of this journey reveals a son who has finally found the strength to ensure that his mother's legacy is the one that endures. The story of the British royal family is often told through grand ceremonies and glittering crowns, but the true history is written in the quiet rooms where decisions are made and debts are finally settled. For Prince William, the journey to this moment began 3 decades ago, in the cold air of 1997, as a 15-year-old boy walked behind his mother's coffin. At the time, the world saw a child who was broken. They did not realize they were looking at a witness who was recording every betrayal, every lie, and every individual who had facilitated his mother's suffering. That boy is now a man, and the reckoning he has delivered is not one of raw emotion, but of calculated institutional justice. By cutting off Annabel Elliott's funding and marginalizing the circle that once protected the secret affair of King Charles and Queen Camilla, William has done more than just save the duchy's money. He has redefined the moral boundaries of the monarchy. He has sent a message that while the past cannot be changed, it will no longer be rewarded. Camilla achieved her ultimate goal. She reached the throne, she wore the crown, and she secured her place in the history books. But it is a victory that feels increasingly hollow. She sits in a palace where the future king no longer bows to her, where her own sister has been removed from the payroll without a word of thanks, and where even her own children are stepping back from the royal stage to protect themselves from the coming storm. She has the title, but William has the power. This is the bittersweet reality of the modern House of Windsor. The monarchy has survived, but the relationships within it have been permanently altered. William's fierce protection of Catherine and his refusal to tolerate the tactics of the past show a man who is determined to build a kingdom where gaslighting and shadow lives have no place. He is not being driven by paranoia, he is being driven by a memory that refuses to fade. As the sun sets on the reign of King Charles and the era of the enablers comes to a close, one truth remains above all others. The wound that opened when William was just an 11-year-old boy reading the transcripts of his father's affair never truly healed, it simply became the steel in his spine. The boy who was once forced to walk in silence behind his mother's coffin has finally found his voice, and he has used it to ensure that the secrets of the past will never have a seat at the table of the future.